Hey guys, I got something pretty interesting for you here. So it's kind of a preview of what Nvidia was just showing off with like DLSS 4 and Reflex 2. And so what I did is in Cyberpunk here, I used lossless scaling, and a lot of you guys probably already know that lossless scaling has its own multi-frame gen kind of mode that lets you generate 4 frames. Or should I say, or three frames in between each of the each real frames. So that's what I'm previewing here, and I'm really making it extreme and kind of letting you see all the frames too by rendering the game natively at 15 frames per second and then upscaling it with multi-frame gen. In other words, using the by 4 times frame upscaling in lossless scaling, which you saw at the beginning of the video there. That's what this is up here. This is lossless scaling. You can see I'm using the by 4 mode with LSFG 2.3. So running the game at 15 FPS, and then it gets upscaled right there. So you can see there's a lot of artifacts on the top of the car there, especially. This is obviously a much lower frame rate than it's intended to be used at, but I'm kind of trying to show the kind of artifacts to look out for in DLSS 4 and that kind of thing. So you can also see in the top corner here that the game is rendering at 15 and upscaling to 60. That's what the 60 means there. That's lossless scaling, rendering that text there to say that it's upscaling from a native 15 to 60. So anyway, eventually I move around, and I had to record this on my phone because I had a lot of trouble recording the generated frames with OBS, so I had to use my phone to record my screen, so that's why it looks weird. And that's not the only reason though, because yes, obviously it's rendering at 15 frames per second. That's extremely low. This is not, and there you can see this is native 15 frames, not very smooth, not very good to play like this. Not intended also to be used for upscaling from 15 frames per second, but YouTube, masks a lot of the experience. So to make it more obvious, I am making it more extreme. So here we're gonna use the by 4 multi-frame gen mode, and now we're showing 60 frames per second with a lot of artifacts. But it's very interesting to see. I mean, there's a lot of, let's see, I'll go to some other situations here. So see when I'm just sitting still and you kind of see cars moving, there's still artifacts, but you kind of see how a more well-implemented solution like DLSS 4 might work well. And let's see, eventually I get out of the car. Let's go see what that looks like. So yeah, when I'm just walking around like this and not moving the mouse, I'm controlling the game with one hand, obviously, so that's difficult. I'm not playing the game normally, let's say that. And you can really see some of the artifacts going on there, especially around the edges of the screen. And I did notice some of that. I did notice that in some of that in the DLSS 4 gameplay. So we're just going to watch a little bit more of this for a second, and then I'll show some examples of these artifacts that I found in the DLSS 4 examples. So it almost looks like the game is running in slow motion in a certain way, but then also not. It's really weird. It's weird, but also very interesting in my opinion. So with I notice with these leaves, a lot of things like this, things that come close to the screen, that's when it really makes it obvious. You see that there, yeah. And like I said, around the edges of the screen, but a lot of the elements of the screen actually work really well. So again, here's 15 frames per second. And just to show, I know this is not the intended use case. Well, here. Yeah. Works pretty well for 15 frames, but also works even better from, where is it, 30 frames. So when I allow the game to render at 30, upscale. So here's native 30. When I allow the game to upscale up to, well, actually here you can see I'm trying to upscale to 120, but it has a cost. It has a cost. So I can only get 95. Frame gen has a cost. So the game drops frames to 25. So I have to turn on performance mode in lossless frame gen. Performance multi-frame gen mode. So many words, but here we go. Now we're getting 120 frames per second. It's a lot smoother, a lot less artifacts, because we're running at a 30 FPS internally now instead of 15. So, this is still below the frame rate intended for multi-frame gen, but you can kind of still see potential. Actually, they showed a lot of examples running at like 22 frames per second, so I shouldn't say that. This is actually how Nvidia, so this is a good idea, what you might be able to kind of expect. And I can see the potential. I can for sure see playing a certain game like this, especially with, and then this cop kept trying to run me over. I don't, for seriously, 5 minutes. I don't know what was going on here. This was insane. But anyway, let's go see some examples of this happening in DLSS for these artifacts also. So you might have seen Digital Foundry put out this hands-on video with the 5080 previewing DLSS 4, and you should check out this video. It's really excellent. It's a really cool video to see the whole thing in action. It shows it a lot better than the frames that I'm going to show from this video. But there's a few artifacts I noticed while watching, and one of them right here, it's really funny. It's, interesting to see this kind of thing in the video, but this guy in the middle here, you can see his left eye, or I guess his right eye, but on the left side of his face, I'm going to frame step through the video, and I think you'll see the artifact I'm talking about here. So let's see if I can get the frame step. There we go. So he's walking along, he looks normal. All of a sudden, oh, there's an eyeball. There's an eyeball. So obviously his eye's there, but frame gen was like, oh yeah, well, there's an eye. There's not an eye in one frame, or it looks different, and the next frame it looks different. So it kind of just, it looks edited in almost, it's like comped in. Here's playing at quarter speed. It's pretty jarring. One more time. So, just watch through the video, see that part. There's one more artifact to show from here. When people get close up to the camera, it's a big problem. So you see things like that. Make that a little more obvious frame by frame, and obviously when you're playing a game, you're not frame stepping through the video, but it's interesting to see that, just technology showcases and stuff, and see these kind of artifacts in the videos. And there's artifacts like this in the Nvidia videos too. I'm not trying to rip on them, it's just interesting. So he turns into a black square here. Then you can kind of start to see through him in this next frame until eventually you pass through his body, and the AI allows you to pass through unharmed. But check out this video by Digital Foundry. It's really cool. And now I'll show you some examples from their Reflex video, actually, because their Reflex 2 technology is actually really similar to frame gen in many ways. It's almost like an unlimited frame gen kind of mode. So let's check out a few artifacts that I saw in their Reflex 2 video also. So here's Reflex 2, their Reflex 2 video showing off Reflex 2. And this looks pretty good. I'm playing at quarter speed, and it looks pretty good. I don't really see any problems, honestly, just watching it at quarter speed. But if I were to frame step through the video, and this, let's be clear, this isn't even frame gen. This is not supposed to be like a frame generation technology. This is hypothetically just Reflex 2.0. But I was noticing the way it works kind of, it's like the asynchronous, I'll show an example later in the video, but it's like asynchronous time warp for VR. And that's really cool, but they're also adding on top of it a sort of AI infill for the parts of the frame that are obscured. So I'll show you some of the artifacts from that. That's what makes it similar to frame gen. So let's see, I'll frame step through the video here. Okay, let's see some of them I noticed. So it's really subtle, but look at the scope of his gun in first person. So that's a real frame. I think that's a real, there's a real frame. Okay, AI generated, I think. Not AI generated. Look around the inside of his scope. You can see, let's see, there's some more frames where you make it more obvious. I saw it when I was watching earlier in the video. Let's see. Gotta find another. Okay, so I didn't really notice them there, or very many. So that was, it's pretty subtle, you know. So I'm not trying to rip on it. I'm just saying, let's see here. If I go back, let's see, is this one of them? Yeah, well, around the name, okay, right there, obviously. And I'm 99% sure that that's not YouTube compression artifacts. You know, right here, that could be muzzle exhaust, I guess. I don't know, something right here. This is definitely like an in-painting artifact from Reflex 2, which really resembles frame gen artifacts, which is very interesting. And that's the main kind of situation. Oh, actually, yeah, hold on. At the top left of the frame up here too, I'm noticing this thing. This is kind of just appearing out of nowhere. So it's really does resemble frame gen in a lot of ways. It's using temporal information to infill those obscured parts of the frame. And it works really well. I mean, I think it's a really cool technology. I think it's sad that it's limited to their newer AI cards, considering that asynchronous time warp, the main part of this, it's not called asynchronous time warp, but it's similar to asynchronous time warp for VR. The main part of this technology is possible on other cards, like my GTX 1080 Ti, and I can demonstrate that because there is an example released a few years ago highlighted by people like 2 Clicks Philip, otherwise known as 3 Clicks Philip, about how it works. So I'll show that example now. So here's that example of a technology very similar to Nvidia Reflex 2 that was demoed a few years ago. It's to asynchronous time warp. It's a technology that like is used in VR a lot because it's very important and it helps a lot, almost like, and it's been used for years. You know, ever since VR has really been popular. So it's, you know, very possible on my card, my GTX 1080 Ti. And what you can see here is the game rendering at 15 frames per second once again, using this asynchronous time warp kind of technology to which is fundamentally very similar to Nvidia Reflex 2, upscaling it to 60 to match my monitor output resolution / mouse movement. So now it's a little more obvious when you move around in the scene, because the scene is only updating at 15 frames per second, obviously. So, but what Nvidia is saying kind of is, you know, you can essentially get unlimited frames. I'm kind of struggling to explain exactly how it's different from frame gen, but you can track targets with, you know, because each frame of your monitor is showing a new position of like where the target is in the game, and Reflex 2.0 is updating that position separately from the game frame rate. And you can kind of see how that might work here if I was able to move with more than one hand right now. How I might be able to track this target a lot more accurately than it would be at 15 frames per second, because that is what the game is rendering at. And let's see, I'll make it a little more obvious now. I'll go down to, say, 2 frames per second. So, okay, you know, it's a little more obvious what's going on now. So it's using not AI, but traditional kind of software techniques to fill in the edges of the screen when it doesn't have the info. So that's what's going on. That's why the edge of the screen looks so strange, running at 2 frames per second right now, and especially moving around the character. And there's a really cool thing you can do in this demo that I thought was interesting, where you can pause the rendering of the game, but continue to update the camera and the frames with the asynchronous time warp. So I'm going to pause the scene rendering, but use Reflex 2.0 essentially to move around the scene without the game actually rendering. And it doesn't really work, but it's interesting to see what that looks like in the limitations. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to move around with WASD, moving backwards. And okay, so weird, and then move forwards again. Okay. Interesting. So I'm gonna, again, the game is not rendering any new frames. This is using asynchronous time warp, essentially Reflex 2.0, to move around the scene without rendering any new frames. And when you start looking around, it's kind of trippy, but really interesting. Kind of, you know, shows you, kind of gives you some insight into how the technology actually works. Very interesting. So now I'm going to start rendering the game again. So here's where we are. Here's it at an uncapped frame rate. So this is a native 60 frames per second. We'll cap it. We'll do a, once again, we'll do a 15 frames per second. So this is 60. This is a native 60, and then we'll cap it to 15 and asynchronous time warp up to 60. And that's what this looks like. This is what that looks like, I should say. And so this is the idea. Again, this is 15 frames per second, which you can tell, but it looks, the idea that Nvidia is saying with Reflex 2.0 is that you can track targets like it's 60 frames per second, which I think would work pretty damn well, actually. I just wish they weren't gatekeeping it to newer graphics cards. So maybe AMD can save the day, or Intel can save the day and come up with a software solution like what is running right now on my graphics card in this demo, this tech demo someone came up with years ago. So that's basically Reflex 2.0 for you right there. Pretty interesting stuff. And 3Clicks Philip, or 2Clicks Philip, has a really good video about this on his channel that he came out of. You should check out 2 years ago. You should go check this out, where he does exactly the same thing I did in it, basically, but he covers it more eloquently than me. So if you want to see how it actually works, check that out. His video here, that's where I learned about it. And last but not least, I wanted to talk about their Nvidia's what demo is this? Zorah, that's funny. Sora, anyone? But their Zorah demo that they showed off with their neural rendering and all that jazz. I want to talk about the neural materials and also the neural face rendering, or whatever they called it. So with the neural materials here, yes, I wanted to check this out. So with these, it's very interesting. It's a big difference in the materials. I'm kind of struggling to see which one is more realistic, I guess, because I see parts of the blue opal here, whatever the hell that is, that's being like details that are being like obscured with the neural render, the neural material when that shows up. There's but I guess maybe that's more realistic because you're seeing more scratches on the surface. Maybe that's like the sunlight would obscure that more, and it's also smaller. And then the metal, it definitely has a different appearance. It definitely looks different. Maybe less video gamey. So, difficult to say which one's better objective, but it looks good. It looks good. With this thing here, this one's really confusing. You know, that looks like tarp, cloth, I don't know, some sort of velvet thing. And then now it looks like it's like a wireframe mesh. And so is that supposed to be the same material? It's like, I don't know what's going on there. I guess it's supposed to be very finely woven. I guess that's the idea. That's what it's supposed to convey, but it's really confusing on YouTube. It really looks like a wireframe. And this part here, they're showing off the new transformer version, the new transformer architecture neural network version of DLSS 4. You can definitely see some, so here's, okay, the convolutional neural network. Here's the CNN, the convolutional neural network version of DLSS, which works really well. It's, you know, it's best in class. You can see some artifacting going on here in this really fine pattern. And it looks great, this image looks great, but you can, you know, this is where you'd see the problem. And then they do a swipe fade here to the transformers architecture version of DLSS, which is DLSS 4, and it really cleans up it really looks even more like native resolution. So look right here where you will see a lot less artifacting, a lot less more arraying. That's where I noticed it mostly. So look at that right there. That looks native very much, and that's why they're showing this off, obviously, because that's way better. This scene is way better. But really mostly just in that part. The rest of the scene looks very similar, I thought. I guess a lot sharper when you like jump between them. It's, oh yeah, look at that. Yeah, there's definitely a sharpness difference. Interesting. And a shading. I guess the shading difference comes from the sharpness. That's very interesting. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing some comparisons of this new Transformers version of DLSS. Again, if you didn't see it on the swipe there, in the middle, this pattern on the middle, yes, gets cleaned up so much. It's really kind of a blob there in the middle with the CNN version. Really a minor nitpick, not really a real problem if you ask me, but very cool to see that progress there. Yes, and last but not least potentially, this neural faces thing. Oh, I hate this. And I've seen, and in slow motion it doesn't look so bad, I guess. And I've seen the potential about this before, but it really looks like when you have a low-res picture that has been upscaled heavily and everything else in the picture is blurry except for the faces, you know. It really reminds me of that. It's really, it just screams AI, the face. I look at the face and it screams AI. It's really annoying, actually, I would say. And I love AI. But when I look at that face, it's not like, whoa, the rendering. It's like, ooh, an AI face. And I know this is the beginning and it's only going to get better, whatever, but I feel like it should not be used on faces. That's all I'm going to say. You know, it's because it's mixed feelings. That's all I'm going to say. It's uncanny valley, maybe, something like that. I don't like the neural faces example right here. It looks like an AI generated video in the worst way possible. Everything else looks great. And yeah, just to finish the video out here, I wanted to show just a few more examples of those frame gen artifacts that I was seeing in the Nvidia DLSS 4 presentation videos. So this is on the Nvidia channel. This is showing DLSS 4 in some production application that's upscaling from 22 FPS, which before they said, you know, it was not. Before they were saying, you know, you needed like 40 or maybe higher to upscale the frame rate. Now they're more confident in the upscaling, which is, you know, perfect. That makes a lot of sense. They're showing an F22 at 22 frames per second, but I'm going to critique it then. And it's really good. I think it's really great still, but I was noticing in the leaves, especially up here, when you frame step, I'll try to point out, you know, what frames I noticed that are AI. So, okay. It's really difficult to notice the artifacts, but okay, that was a real one. This is an AI frame, obviously. in the leaves right here. When you compare it with the last one, that's very sharp pixel detail there. And then you go to the next one, it's a little blurry. You know, it looks great. It just looks like there's motion blur applied, basically. The next one also, well, let's see. Yes, yeah, so each frame there, it gets consecutively blurrier, basically. And then you move on to the next one, which is a real frame. Okay, yes, that's very interesting. So there's the real frame. You get real frame, fake frame, fake frame, fake frame, real frame. And it works really well. It works really well. But especially in the leaves there, you notice it where it almost looks like a motion blur effect being applied. Where AI frame, or wait, that's a real frame there, I think? No, that's a real frame. That's an AI frame. Real frame. AI frame. AI frame. AI frame. Real frame? It's difficult to say. Up here, you can see right up here in the leaves, I believe those are some frame gen artifacts, and down here too. It is especially hard to tell on YouTube, but I've been looking at this stuff for a while now, and so I'm fairly confident when I see motion frame gen artifacts and also YouTube frame compression artifacts. I've been analyzing both of those things recently for a while. So yeah, anyway, I'm really looking forward to seeing Digital Foundry's analysis of this and seeing AMD's response with their RX 9070 and stuff like that, and their anti-lag 2 technologies, and maybe FSR 4. And then also what Intel might have to say with XeSS 2 and their frame gen technologies. And yeah, with lossless scaling, their LSFG frame gen technology works really well. That's what I showed off in the beginning of the video. I like using it on my 1080 Ti. My GTX 1080 Ti works really well. I like trying to get RTX features to work on my GTX card that is from 2017. So if you like that kind of stuff, you should subscribe to my channel, because I'm going to keep doing it. Anyway, peace.